Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the First Gen Entrepreneurs Strategy Session live event. So glad to have everybody here. We've got quite a few people who've chosen to attend. Looks like Timalyn and I both reached out to our networks and managed to snag a few attendees. So we look forward to sharing some useful information with you all today and hearing from you as well. So if you are tuned in, please let us know where you're listening in from. We'd love to know what part of the country or what part of the world you're listening in from, for starters. But Timalyn, my guest today, she and I both happen to be in the great state of Kentucky. So we're some locals. Tim and I have gotten to know each other over the last few months. And she has a really specific and useful skill when it comes to entrepreneurship. So Timalyn, in her own words, correct me if I'm wrong, Timalyn, but you perform surgery on people's tax situations. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
So a licensed board certified surgeon of some kind, right? So Timalyn, you're licensed through the IRS, but you don't actually work for the IRS. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so
Not a
you're
federal employee.
not okay. All right. So you're one of the good guys then, basically,
Yeah,
right?
one of the good ones.
And your role, obviously, you've got an accounting background, you know a lot about taxes, but specifically the thing that you're after is representing your clients before the IRS. Is that true?
Yeah, so what I do, a lot of people think, oh, you work with taxes, like, can you do mine? And it's like, I could, but that's not what I specialize in. With that representation piece, that could be if you're facing an audit with the Internal Revenue Service, or if you have a tax debt that you can't pay today and you'd like someone to represent you to negotiate that, set up some type of payment arrangement. That is also what I do.
Okay. All right. So you're capable of doing someone's taxes, but that's not really what your most valuable service is. Instead, that it's when someone's getting in hot water with the IRS, which none of us want.
Yes.
Which is a nice segue to the title of today's topic is how to avoid becoming my client. And
hmm
this might be one of my favorite titles of these strategy sessions that we've done so far. Um, because I said this in my post last week that like anybody who's like so good at what they do that they can actively promote turning away business, it's like, all right, you must be good at your job.
I saw that. I was like, "Oh, he's too kind. He's too kind."
But the truth is if you need Timlin services, it's because you've got a bad tax situation and you need some representation before the IRS. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory why somebody might want to avoid that situation. But let's talk just for a few minutes about what it's like to be your client. Like what has led to this situation, and what is an entrepreneur who is now needing your services, what are they going through? What's that like?
Yeah, one of the main things, and as an entrepreneur, people can probably relate to this. When you find a new problem in your business, you can be like super excited to get into it, or there's that fear sometimes where you have like analysis paralysis and you're like, I just can't take the leap to take care of that problem. Well, what happens, what I've seen, I work with people that are phenomenal at what they do, like the best real estate agent, the best marketer, the best person in sales, but then they hit this wall when they get this tax bill, and that's not a problem that's in their area of genius or expertise. So what happens is we have this person who's not morally corrupt, anything like that. They're just so good at what they do and they're making this money that when the IRS comes to say, "Hey, you owe us," one, the analysis paralysis comes because they feel like they failed in their business. When actually, I wouldn't say the only, but the major mistake is just not outsourcing that part of the business to make sure that the taxes stay in line. So
Mm.
we have somebody that's kind of putting their head in the sand when it comes to the taxes because they know they can make the sales, right? That's how they got this situation in the first place. And I have people that try to outwork it, outwork it, outwork it without setting up the proper systems. So, what that looks like for a first gen entrepreneur, we have the person who's stressed out, who has the spouse that's like, hey, you better get this together or else. We have them dealing with family members in their head, like, see, that's why you should have kept that W 2 job. So, any kind of financial strain, you know, it weighs on you heavy, but especially when you're that first gen entrepreneur and you're like, I have to do this right because not everybody's believing in me. So we're looking at a person that's losing sleep, trying to out hustle their tax bill. And then they come to me, and it's funny because, like I said, most of the time, I haven't met a first gen entrepreneur that's not a go getter. We get on the phone, and the first thing I tell the person is to breathe,
Mm.
to breathe. Because as taxpayers, we have rights. The IRS, without due process, can't just come clean out your bank account and all of that. So it's a frantic time before actually becoming my client. But once we actually meet and I'm retained, I'm able to help that person again breathe, you know, let me step into your shoes to handle the situation with the IRS and work with you as a partner so you can continue to focus and be phenomenal at what you do, and we can get these back taxes behind you.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I went through something similar in my own journey. So I went into business in 2006, and just like you described, I just got to work. I'm just heads down. I'm focused on, getting work done and billing for my time, and you just get going, and that's good. But the taxes and things like estimated payments and when I'm supposed to make this stuff and how I'm supposed to do it, I didn't really know any of that. Um, and then paired with, I wasn't the best communicator with my CPA and vice versa. So I wound up, in my second year of business, as it came to tax time, finding out I had this huge tax bill due that I was not prepared for at all. And it was one of the most stressful times. And it was so early in my entrepreneurial journey that it was like, it almost broke me. you know, I had to jump through
Yeah.
all kinds of hoops to kind of recover from that.
And that's one of the things I share too. Like I say over and over again, like back taxes shouldn't ruin your life. Like you said, it will break you. I've seen it break people, and it's like, no, you're an excellent entrepreneur. Just take this part off your plate, please, because we need you out here in the economy. But I like the way that you brought up, you said you weren't the best communicator. One of the things that I tell people when they work with me, I can only work if you do, but it also goes the other way. I like to give the disclaimer like, hey, I know you're an intelligent person. You're out here making the money in your business. I don't want you to think I'm trying to belittle you by the way I'm explaining this, but I'm going to act like you don't even know what a tax return is when I'm telling you what I'm doing and what I'm saying to the IRS to make sure that you understand every single step along the way. Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm negotiating on your behalf, but if something's done incorrectly, you're the one that's going to be on the hook. just like
Hmm.
with the tax return. I've had people say, "Well, I don't even prepare my own taxes." It's like, but under penalties and perjury, who is signing it? So you don't have to know how to do it, but you need to understand what you are signing. But the reverse part of that, I can't work if you don't, but it's also the same thing for a first generation entrepreneur. I can't assume you know everything because if you were as good at taxes as me, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You should be doing what I'm doing, working with me, right?
Right.
So that is a two-way street. I know that as a tax professional, I have to pull back sometimes, and I refer to it as taxonese. Like I love tax law. I'm a tax nerd, but you aren't. So I have to make sure that I take down that barrier and those walls of communication where all the stuff that excites me, you're sitting there and your eyes are kind of glazing over. Like, can you just tell me what to pay and when?
Right. It's funny that you say that. So I'm an IT guy, or I should say, I'm a recovering IT guy. That's my former life, right? And IT guys, I think, are notorious for doing exactly what you just described, where like we can just dive deep into techie stuff, and it you see people's eyes roll in the back of their head, and it's just really easy to lose sight of the fact that you're speaking a foreign language to them. So my friend Zara here, she just commented taxonese. That's a I wish I had something like that in the IT world. I don't. We would just say speaking geek to people. Oh, geek, Greek, geek. Maybe we could do a play off of that somehow.
There you go.
Um, but I think that underlying point about communication is just so critical. Like that was where I went wrong with my accountant. Was he, I think, assumed that I knew more about this stuff than I did at the time. Now I've learned a lot since then. Um, the hard way, unfortunately. But he thought I knew more than I did, and I thought he was really just kind of just doing it for me, everything, right? And that he would let me know how much to set aside and when and how all this was going to work and blah blah blah. So because of that disconnect is where we got into a situation. Um, Bob makes a great point here. Honesty and transparency are necessary with both CPAs and lawyers. I've never seen it work well without it. That's really well put, Bob. And I would add to it that it's a two-way street, right? The entrepreneur can't just hire a CPA or a lawyer and then absolve themselves of all responsibility. You
Yes.
you have to know. I think that's the point that you're making too, Timlin.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's very nicely put. But back to what you were saying as well, if you're in the tech world or I'm over here in the tax world, sometimes we assume that the taxpayer knows certain things. I've had clients when I was still doing tax prep come and be like, I'm really not happy with my previous accountant, asking the reasons why before you onboard. That's a tip for all first gen entrepreneurs. All money is not good money. You need to listen to why the person left their previous professional. But in listening to people, I realize that taxpayers don't always understand different tax services. So a lot of the times people are like, "Oh yeah, I have a CPA, I have an accountant. They take care of my tax return." But that's considered tax preparation, whereas proactive things to help you reduce your liability is going to be tax planning. A tax
Mm,
estimate is a completely different calculation than your tax preparation based on the last year is dealing with this year. So we have people that go to CPAs and you say you want your taxes done. The CPA takes that for face value. You want your taxes done. And it's true of other industries as well. But I know for the stereotypical accountant, they don't like to ask for the upsell. You only ask for tax prep. You know you need to make estimates because you didn't ask me to calculate it, right?
interesting.
So I
Interesting.
think that's another thing when we're talking about honesty and transparency. Even at this point, I have clients who religiously, just because of their income amount, they're making like $60,000, $70,000 quarterly tax payments.
Hmm.
That still makes me sweat. Even like if we get somebody, with the estimated tax payments and at the end of the year, maybe they have to write a $12 check, that still makes me sweat. I bring all that up because I don't think anybody who's CPA, EA, tax professional is intentionally just being like, "Oh, yeah, you should have done your estimated tax payments, you didn't." So I may be biased because 'cause I'm on this side, but I think that's another thing that as an industry, we could probably do a better job of communicating like, "Hey, tax preparation is one service. Calculations, tax planning, things to proactively reduce your tax bill, that's tax planning. It's a different service."
Hmm.
And then you have your estimate calculations because you wouldn't go to a mechanic to get your oil changed, but then they see another service come in and be like, "Oh, yeah, that's included with my oil change price." No, you pay for each thing separately and talk about them in different instances.
That's really interesting. I think that hits the nail on the head of what happened to me. Was I got tax preparation. He prepared my taxes, but he didn't help
Mhm.
me with the planning aspect of it. So I didn't know what to expect. We didn't have a strategy in place on how to minimize my tax bill. Um, and the irony in all of this is if he was like so many CPAs that you're talking about who they don't want to upsell, they don't want to make you feel like, hey, I'm trying to sell you things you don't need. In reality, I think most first gen entrepreneurs are going to say, no, I'm looking to you to tell me what I need to do. You prescribe to me, not the other way around, what needs to happen here. So it sounds like there's a divide there that both sides need to know about so that they can really help each other.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure.
So let's talk a little bit about this section here. How entrepreneurs often go wrong. I think we've kind of covered communication, but what are some other things that getting down into the nuts and bolts that entrepreneurs are costly mistakes that they make?
Yeah, one of them is horrible record keeping. I'm not even gonna
Mm,
say bad, it's horrible.
mm,
So, one thing that we have to make sure is being done when dealing with the IRS, whether it's tax preparation, tax representation on my part, we have to make sure that everything is substantiated. So, if you were saying, "Hey, I spent this much on supplies," your bank statement is not sufficient. We needed a receipt that's gonna match with that. And when I say we, I mean in general, like business owners, because guess what? Unless your tax preparer is also your bookkeeper or accountant, they don't wanna see your receipts. They wanna see finished financial statements. So, it is the responsibility of either your bookkeeper. If you're a DIY right now using QuickBooks or something, it's your responsibility to make sure that you have those different expenses substantiated with a receipt. I've had taxpayers before be like, "Oh, yeah, well, this is all from Target, so I know that was supplies." Guess what? They sell hundreds, probably thousands of items at Target. Just
right.
because your bank statement says Target does not mean you actually got supplies
Right.
at Target. You coulda
It
got
could be
clothes,
shampoo or something. I mean, who
food.
knows?
Yeah, exactly. So that is one of the things, and that is something. It's a domino effect. It messes you up at tax time, so you may be overpaying. I'll speak for myself. If there are things that I think are, I don't really know about that with the financial statements, and I ask for substantiation and I can't get it, we're not putting that on the tax return. So
Hmm.
you may have a huge deduction that you could have actually taken, but because you can't prove it, it's not on the tax return. So now we have a tax bill that's higher than you anticipated because you couldn't prove your deduction. On
Right.
the flip side of that, let's say the professional still puts it on there for whatever reason. I guess they want their office audited. I don't know. I can't speak for that type of professional. Let's say they go ahead and put it through, but something triggers the IRS or you get caught in a random audit and they look at that number and they want it. You're still going to have to be able to substantiate that or the IRS may disallow it. So now again, we have a tax bill higher than you anticipated, and you're looking at potential penalties because you underreported income according to them because you have a deduction on there that shouldn't have been in the first place. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
good record keeping helps all things when it comes to
Right.
business. Um, the
Could
other
I
thing,
interject real quick on that
yeah.
before we? So, in my business, one of the best decisions I ever made was to hire a bookkeeper. And you if you're just getting started off, you may not be able to afford that right away, and it's going to be on you to keep your own records and things like that. But I think that two things. Number one is bookkeepers aren't as expensive as you might assume. I was a little surprised at really how affordable it was to hire a bookkeeper to help me with those. So much so that I kind of regretted not looking into it sooner, because I'd been going for a few years trying to keep up with this on my own. And then my second thing is that if and when you do hire a bookkeeper, it's going to help you with having some accountability in terms of providing that the documentation, right? Because they're going to expect the same thing, and just don't make their life any more difficult than it needs to be. Just give them the records that they need so that they can get these things added in there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Like you were saying, it helps you stay accountable, but then also you know your numbers. Because you might be like, yeah, I'm out here grinding, I'm making all this money. But then when your bookkeeper gives you the financial statements and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't make any money because I blew it all on this. So maybe I need to, tweak my marketing because I thought I was putting in marketing dollars, but now I can see the return on that investment is horrible. So how much did your bookkeeper actually just save you because now you know to make that tweak?
Right. Right.
Another thing you said, and I think it goes back to taxpayers not understanding the different, I guess, segments of accounting and being a tax professional. You assumed the bookkeeper would be something you couldn't afford. But did you know the actual duties of the bookkeeper? I know that a lot of people think, oh, my bookkeeper is going to do my taxes, this, and that. Well, if they do all that, it may be something you can't afford yet.
Right.
But if you're only getting bookkeeping at that time, it probably is a lot more feasible than what people anticipate at first.
Well, and then to just kind of add to it, the money you spend on a bookkeeper saves you time, number one, so that you can now go focus on what it is that you actually make money on and that you're
It
good
turns
at,
into money.
right?
Yes.
So it's one of those things that, right, just on that one thing alone probably will pay for itself, right? But
Mhm.
then there's the downside risk of not having a bookkeeper and getting yourself in trouble, right? So now here's a huge potential cost that you've avoided. And then three, in my experience, if you have a bookkeeper who's a professional and keeps these nice clean books, when it is time to have your taxes done, your CPA's job is so much easier,
It's
right?
way easier.
And so it's
Yes.
probably paid for itself again, because your CPA is not spending as much time trying to untangle this rat's nest that you've just handed them.
Yeah, and that's something I would share with people as well when I did tax prep. And I even share it now. If you are an entrepreneur, even if it's your first year, you're like, yeah, I can do these taxes myself. The IRS they keep a lot of data. So I think I don't know the 2021 numbers, but the year before, it took around 12 hours for the average Schedule C, which most first gen entrepreneurs, if they haven't elected to be an S Corp or a corporation, they're going to be on the Schedule C as either a sole proprietor or a single member LLC, which, by the way, the IRS doesn't recognize single member LLC as an entity. That's something at the state level. So that's why you still file a Schedule C that says sole proprietor. Tax fact for you there. But with that, with the average one taking 12 hours, a Schedule C return, you're going to see anywhere from like $500 to $1,500. And people are like, oh my goodness, that's so high. I've never paid that much for that return. But if you think about it, let's say you're a consultant, whatever your hourly billing rate is, if you take that billing rate times the 12 hours that you would have saved, if you knew what you were doing when you were getting your taxes together,
Mm-hmm.
how much money did you actually save by letting a professional do it?
Right. It's like, it's just not worth it when you actually dig in.
Yeah, I know people that are like, "Oh man, it took me like all weekend to do my tax return." I'm like, if you could have devoted that time specifically to sales, how much money would you have made? So how
Right.
much did it actually cost you to do
Right.
your own tax return?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if someone can't answer that question, or they say, "Well, it doesn't work that way because I don't have billable time to just backfill that time." Well, then you
That's
have a
another
different issue.
issue. Yeah, that's a
That's
completely different
that's
issue.
exactly right. Yeah. So like you need to think that way about what your time is worth, and think about opportunity cost. What's this costing me by focusing on this instead of focusing on the thing that I'm good at and marketable with? And if you can't make that trade in your mind because you don't have income over here, well, we need to get you in touch with a sales coach or a marketing consultant or something, because you're doing it wrong at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. So
But
let oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say bookkeeping is the foundation too, because people are like, "Well, bookkeeping doesn't have anything to do with taxes," but we just explained why it absolutely does, because for self-employed individuals, what a lot of them don't realize is in the United States, we have a pay-as-you-go tax system. So if you're transitioning from a W-2 job to, being an entrepreneur, this is gonna make sense. Each paycheck you get, they're taking taxes out.
Hmm.
And it is your employer's responsibility to withhold that for you, to send that in for you. When you become self-employed, you have the privilege of doing that yourself, and it's
Right.
called quarterly estimated tax payments. When you don't make those payments, that's how people end up owing. Because 'cause I've had people say, "Well, I made less actually in my business, bottom line, than I did in my job, like, why do I owe?" And I'm like, "Well,
Hmm.
how much did you pay in?" And then also people don't realize that when you become self-employed, and this is for if you're a partner in a business or a sole proprietor, you now have to pay self-employment tax, which is it's a self-employed person's share of Social Security and Medicare. What you don't realize on the back end when you work a W-2 job is that you pay into Social Security and Medicare, but your employer also pays into that for you as well. Once you're self-employed, congratulations, because now you have the privilege of paying both halves. Now, I've heard
Right.
people say, "But you get to write off half of it." Just like any other deduction, you have to pay it before you can write it off. So,
Right.
yes, there is a deduction, but you still have to make that payment before you can write it off. But tying it into bookkeeping, how are you gonna make the correct estimated tax payment if you don't know your number for the
Right.
quarter?
Right. Exactly.
Because yes, it's an estimate. We're using projections to figure out what you should be paying. But if you're not hitting your income goals, do you really want to overpay your estimated tax payment? Absolutely not. Once you become self employed, that is the time. If you still like refunds, dislike them now
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're manually making these payments each quarter to get a refund. That's money that you could have invested in your business throughout the year.
Right.
So
Right.
why would you want that refund? Now, I'm not saying don't make the estimated payments because you're going to be sending me a message after this because you need to be my client,
Right.
but only pay what you have to legally.
Yeah. I've heard it equated to, if you overpay in your estimated payments so that you ultimately get a refund back, that's the same as you giving a loan to the United States government, and you don't get to earn any interest off of that loan. That's
Yeah,
just, here you
interest free.
go. You manage this for a bit. Really, the sweet spot is not to overpay and not to underpay. Just get it on the money is the best approach for that.
Mhm.
Yep. All right. Well, let's talk for a few minutes then, just to kind of wrap this up, because our time is up. But how would you summarize this? What's the best thing for someone to avoid becoming your client? And when we answer after we answer that, let's get into some scenarios where it would be good for them to be your client.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to what I said earlier, good record keeping. If you can't afford someone yet, all hope is not lost. You want to make sure all of your income that you are making, that you are depositing that into a bank account, a business bank account, not a personal one. Because once you people think they're safe once they have the LLC, but once you start commingling funds, you've pierced that veil that protects you. So make
Mm,
sure you have your business income in a business account and you have track of all that income that came in. The next part with that, the same with expenses, you want to make sure you have those receipts as well, because you're not going to be tracking this forever. Eventually, you are going to have to hand this over to a bookkeeper. If you can't afford it, it is like Andrew said, it's going to be one of the best investments you've made in your business, and it will help you with making projections, reducing costs, those types of things. Um, the next thing is make sure you understand the different types of taxes that you need to pay, such as we brought up like estimated tax payments. But then also, if you are working with a professional, go ahead and have that conversation about, hey, what services am I paying for? And what services do I need to add on? And what are the additional fees for that? Because just because they're not doing your estimated tax payments now doesn't mean that they won't. But I can guarantee you it's just an additional service and fee. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're asking for tax prep, they're probably just taking your word for it. And like, man, they keep owing every year. They really need to make estimated tax payments. So, like we talked about earlier, it is a communication thing. So, you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself by having that in line so you can make those estimated tax payments, not have 3 back-to-back years of success, and now we owe over $100,000, and you have to come back and find this live so
Right.
you can get my contact information.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a perfect segue. Do you have a kind of a call to action? What's a scenario where someone should get in touch with you and how?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you find yourself in a situation where you owe the IRS, and I'll use you as an example, Andrew, um, you owe the IRS and you're investing in your business at this point, you don't have the money to pay them today. First things first, please get that return filed so we can avoid other penalties. I do primarily work with, and you guys hold your seats, nobody pass out. I work with entrepreneurs that owe $100,000 or more and they can't pay today.
Mm,
Um, if you still owe around 50, that's a good time for us to have a call. If it's under that and you have been tax compliant, so that means you have all your returns filed to date, you're on track with making estimated tax payments, which by the way, if you're still working a W-2 job, you can actually adjust your withholding. So that takes out extra so you don't have to manually make those quarterly payments. But if you're in the area, like I said, below that 50,000, it may be worth it for us to have a phone call, but if you can get that paid off within 36 months, I've actually written an ebook that will walk you right through the process on how to do that either online or on the phone, which lately online is better. We're hoping, I'll say tax professionals are hoping that the IRS does actually get some funding so they can answer the phone and notices and things again in a
right.
timely fashion, but we'll
Right.
see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, that's wild to me that there's enough people out there that need your services who are $100,000 or more indebted to the IRS and need help. But what that does is that just really drives home the point of why you want to avoid becoming Timalyn's client in the first place. So we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day for us to give some preventative measures to keep that from happening. And then you've even gone to the effort of making an ebook available as a free
Mhm.
resource for people. An ounce of
Well,
prevention
the
is worth a
ebook's
pound of
not.
cure, right? A paid resource for people.
Okay.
Sorry.
There are some free resources out there. I do actually have a podcast, so it's the Tax Relief
Nice.
with Timalyn Bowens podcast. So if somebody is experiencing a levy where the IRS is pulling the money out of your account, they've done a lien, something like that, you can check out that podcast and I walk you through what's actually going on and some options that you have to get that settled.
Nice.
There are
Apologies.
free resources
Yeah.
out there, but that ebook is not.
Okay. I should have checked with you before I said that, but
It's a
again,
consultation in a book, so that one's not
nice.
free.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it might as well be free in comparison to the value you would get out of it versus being stuck in a situation like this. So, Appreciate your time. Hope everybody who listened in or watches this recording in the future gets some value out of it. Timalyn and I both are not only active on LinkedIn, but we're also both members of the First Gen Entrepreneurs community. So that's my plug. If you're a first gen entrepreneur and you feel like you're going through this journey alone and you'd like some support, that's what this community is all about. So you can check that out at firstgen.biz. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you again, Timlin, for taking time out of your day for us, and we'll talk to you soon.